Well, having done a lot of irrigation work, I know tail enders are at a disadvantage, so if you'll give me a time signal. So that I don't eat into what this. So the challenge you gave was quite broad, and rather than, I don't have the full spectrum to say what are the greatest constraints, but I can tell you a very broad set of constraints in terms of institutional issues that apply to almost everything we try to do in agriculture. So I want to give some examples of this. I'm going to start with an example of irrigation because that's what I deal with a lot. We look at how we try, what does it take to get irrigation taken up in Africa, and then how do institutions play a role in that, as well as for technologies, natural resource management. And then I'm going to focus a little bit more on those. So irrigation is very important. Only about 6% of the cultivated land in Africa is irrigated. Asia, 37%, Latin America, 14%. Certainly irrigation was a big factor in raising agricultural productivity in Asia. And the 6% that is there is contributing a lot of the, 20% of the agricultural value. But there is quite a bit of potential for expansion. Now, if you look, some colleagues of mine have nice pictures about where is that potential for both, this is for small-scale irrigation, and then with small-scale and large-scale at different costs. The important story there is that it does irrigation does tend to be more expensive in Africa. But the other part of it that these pretty pictures don't really show is that it's not just the financial cost of building or even building, operating, and maintaining the systems that is a constraint. It is also the institutional arrangements that have to go into place. Now, a diagram we've used to explain why institutions are important. If you think of the time horizon and the spatial scale of any type of irrigation, from short-term, within a season, to long-term, over generations, and from the plot to the farm to the community up to the national level. An annual crop is pretty easy. You get the returns in a season. You can do it by yourself. Fine. Drip irrigation generally has a longer time horizon. If you don't have secure property rights, then you may not be making that investment. If you move up the spatial scale, a lot of wells serve more than one smallholder. Then you need to start thinking about coordination. Check dams, anything that's done at a landscape level, terracing. These things have longer time horizons and larger spatial scale. Then you start thinking about watershed management. Or if you've got lots of individual wells in there, you'd better start worrying about aquifer management. Otherwise, you're going to get the problem you have in a lot of South Asia of really rapidly falling water tables. And on and on and on. So if you've got canal irrigation, building reservoirs, transboundary river basins, all of these have longer and longer time horizons, which means you need to look at not only the land tenure, but the property rights over water and the water tenure. And you need to start thinking about the coordination. Now, at higher levels, the state generally has been the providing the coordination institutions. State doesn't do really well at the very local level. Their collective action institutions often have the comparative advantage. But what doesn't fit on here so neatly is, well, first of all, what's important is the interaction between the two. And then what doesn't fit on here as neatly is the private sector. And that's part of what we're looking at more and more. As public-private partnerships become a buzzword, how does that actually fit into this? Now, it's not just irrigation. If we think about some of the other forestry, carbon markets, seed systems, integrated pest management, all of these also. So almost all natural resource management involves one or the other of these types of institution. Then, even if we take that annual crop that I started with, it's the simple one, but we want to bring in new, improved crop varieties, whether it's sweet potatoes that have high vitamin A or maize that has higher yields. Well, we think about seed systems. Okay, that involves private sector, it involves national agricultural research systems that develop the new seeds, as well as dissemination through collective action, as well as through market structures. Gene banks are a global public good, very long time horizons, and you have to have local agrobiodiversity in situ. Again, that requires often collective action and information sharing. So now, in the interests of time, I'm not going to go into the things on property rights, except to say that secure tenure and secure property rights does not mean just titling the whole country. And we can give you lots of examples. There's many sources of security of property rights and multiple bundles of rights that matter. I want to come back to this coordination institutions. In irrigation, which I've been working on for 30 years now, there have been these trends. First of all, it was the state. No, then we have a fiscal crisis of the state, so we have to have collective action doing it. Whoops, water user associations didn't do everything we wanted, so now it's private sector. I think what we need to do is think about a range of possible configurations and what's appropriate for role of each in different settings. Eleanor Ostrom talked a lot about polycentricity, which the word is complicated, and getting that concept across, that there are multiple overlapping institutional arrangements that are needed. And the question is, who coordinates the coordinators? So, in terms of our implications, what we generally find is that there are gaps in the institutional arrangements. So what do? Well, first of all, I want to say we need a lot of my latest hobby horse is that a lot of the problems in development lie in the search for simple solutions. That we've got to get beyond the notion of panaceas, which have caused us to overinflate our expectations, and then they crash, and then we move on to the next trend. Also, we need to get beyond the notion of social engineering. Institutional change is possible, but it's an organic process. It's path dependent. There are things you can do, but they require an investment, and we need to recognize them as investments. And right now, those investments may not be things that are easily evaluated by a randomized control trial. They have to be tailored to their environment. So I think the challenge before us is, what can we do in this arena? So, that.
Thank you, Ruth. That was wonderful, and you're miles inside time. Terrific. Thank you very much.
That's what I get for being worried.
Perfect.